It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Last week, I discussed one of the better films in the horror genre from 2024, Oddity. This week, I go 45 years before that soon-to-be classic chiller for a 1979 cheapo creepo with Don Kiesler's Bog. You know, that's one of the great things about Monster Mondays, right? One week I'm talking about an indie darling full of cool ideas and cool ways to portray those ideas. And the following week, I just want to talk about a swamp monster that's probably best known for Leonard Maltin making fun of it in his review. What can I say? I'm a man with a pretty wide range of what I can talk about and appreciate. But hey, at least both Bog and Oddity were indie films, so, I mean, that's the thing, I guess. But naturally, because this is a 70s nature monster movie, we start with some shots of a serene rural bog. And because this is a bog in a rural part of the United States in the 70s, of course, we see a hillbilly rowing along and lighting dynamite and using it to fish by tossing it into the water and letting it all blow up. And as he collects the dead fish that have come to the surface after the blast, something from underneath grabs him and takes him away. As the movie proper begins, a pair of married couples arrive in a station wagon to spend some time at Bog Lake. These couples are Chuck and Kim Pierce and Alan and Mae Tanner. Chuck and Alan just plan to drink and fish and camp, while I guess the women are just supposed to sit around and do nothing. They find the boat of the hillbilly fisherman who used the dynamite left behind after the bog monster grabbed him. And Chuck and Alan pretty much decide, hey man, free boat for us to use with the tackle left in it for our own pleasure. The couples constantly bicker, and a lot of this is directly related to what I said. Chuck and Alan are more interested in getting wasted and the other bullshit, while the women are neither really dressed nor have the attitude for camping. Something in the water nudges the boat being used by Chuck and Kim to kind of take a tour around this portion of the lake, and it causes her to freak out and want to go home immediately. And meanwhile, Mae does not like the backwoods, but kind of sticks it out even after Alan offers to let her choose if they should just pack their things and go home now or not. But shortly after, as Alan finds a new spot to fish, Mae is pulled into the water by the bog monster, and Chuck and Alan search for Mae while Kim returns to the car and lock herself in for safety. Except, well, the car is already locked, and she's also just perfect pickings to be attacked by a bog monster. So the guys go into town and speak to Sheriff Rydholm and Dr. Wednesday. Now, these characters are played by Aldo Ray and Marshall Thompson, respectively. Both of these guys are longtime character actors who, I guess, meant to bring some gravitas to the movie or something, or at least like maybe a name. Anyway, Rydholm conducts a search through the bog to try to find the wives. The women are found, but they are found mostly bloodless, but also without any kind of significant wound on their body. Coroner and I guess biologist Jenny Glenn, played by Gloria DeHaven, says that whatever killed these women is not human. It had to be something that had some sort of protrusion or something that could pierce the skin and burrow into the heart or the aorta or down their throat or something and basically suck the body clean of blood. Now, another body shows up, but this time it's one of the sheriff's men. And meanwhile, Chuck and Alan want to buy some guns and hunt whatever killed their wives. Now, they are denied at the gun shop thanks to common sense gun laws preventing an out-of-state person from buying guns in 1979. But they meet local yokel Wallace Fry, who says that he can not only help them, but he can get them anything they need. And Wallace takes them to a shack where a witchy bog lady named Adriana, who is also played by Gloria DeHaven, lives. She tells them that she knows what's in the bog, and normally it sleeps and no one ever knows it exists, and it can go decades, possibly even hundreds of years, without being seen or, even wakes up, but something has awoken it by the use of the dynamite at the start of the movie. And now that the creature is awake, it needs to feed, and feed it will. When the creature gets near Adriana's shack, Wallace freaks out and wants to escape, only for him to be eaten by the bog monster. Alan and Chuck take the information to Jenny and Dr. Wednesday about what sleeps in the bog and how it stays in the muck. They then take the information to the sheriff, and Rydholm opts to go with an explosive solution. He plans to blow the bog up to kill the monster, to which Alan and Chuck are like totally in favor of this fucking thing being blown up for what it did to the wives. But Wednesday thinks it's a rather drastic move, and Jenny feels everyone needs to practice caution because they really don't know what they're dealing with. Rydholm goes through with a mighty explosion to kill the bog monster, and after witnessing such a big explosion, Rydholm is satisfied everything in the lake is dead and just leaves, while Chuck and Alan decide they still need to go looking for the monster. Soon there are gunshots heard, and by the time Rydholm and his deputy named Corky, yes, his name's Corky, return to the lake to see what's going on and what is being shot at, Chuck and Alan are missing. Well, they're pretty much dead, that you see chunks of them around, and Corky ends up dying too. One thing they do get from this is a chunk of the bog monster for Jenny and Wednesday to study. They figure out this creature basically needs blood similar to insects like mosquitoes or spiders or something of that. And it also is able to introduce an anticoagulant to the hosts so that they can more freely feed the blood without it being interrupted as far as the flow of it. And what's more, the creature is basically a giant cancerous tumor that is somewhat sentient. The creature is also part animal, part mineral. It's a lot of things that basically no one could really ever fathom. So, they're doing a lot of legwork telling you that this thing is not anything we would recognize as a typical creature, mostly because we have yet to see the creature at this point. But anyway, Rydholm has shut the town down so no one can enter from the outside. He basically wants to minimize the number of bodies that will show up thanks to this creature. However, that doesn't stop the people who are already in the area by the time it's shut down getting into the bog lake area and getting killed anyway. And sure enough, that happens. But he's also sent for a couple of guys who know how to scuba dive so that they can kind of inspect the bog and basically hunt the monster. And he also wants his deputies to bring in Adriana so that he can talk to her to get the skinny on how to kill the monster or what this monster is. Now, everybody in the town ultimately, after all of these things, they can't find Adriana. The two scuba divers get killed pretty quickly by the bog monster. The idea now is to set a trap to lure the creature using the scent of blood, and then spray the creature with some sort of chemical compound to incapacitate it. During this, Rydholm is killed, but they capture the creature and bring it to a lab where Wednesday and Jenny call in an ichthyologist to study the monster, and it's soon discovered that Adriana was the creature's mate. Apparently, the creature can't reproduce without a human female, and it can basically inject the female with some of its own green goo blood or whatever, and it makes her a willing participant in mating. After all, they know the creature had eggs, and Adriana attempted to warn the creature, linking her to the monster about that trap, and she was killed in the process by the cops as well, or by the sheriff's deputies. It's also possible that the injection of its blood kept Adriana alive longer than a person should be. I don't know. This movie is just trying out some shit to see what fits, but it's got to fill 85 minutes somehow. But anyway, the bog monster escapes and tries to attack Jenny, and Wednesday and the ichthyologist, Dr. Warren, chase after the monster, who has gotten away with Jenny, setting up our big conclusion. And so after all of this, the explosives, the rifles, the scuba diving hunters, the scientific methods Jenny and Wednesday try to cook up, hillbilly mobs with all their guns, the knowledge of how it reproduces with a human female, and the lore of that Adriana possesses, how do they get rid of the creature? They set it on fire. No fooling, they just set the damn thing on fire. No one thought to try that at any point along this entire ordeal. But anyway, apparently not. In the chase to find the monster and save Jenny, Wednesday and Warren chase down the monster and basically beat him up and light him on fire while Jenny gets clear. And we soon discover that the monster egg still exists in its underwater habitat, meaning the threat of a bog monster is far from over. Maybe. Kind of does one of those, the end, and then puts the question mark at the end of that. That's, you know, you're really dealing with a classic monster movie when it does something like that. Anyway, let's talk about 3 things I like about Bog. To start, I will sort of echo something said in a review by film critic John Kenneth Muir, in which he wrote, "They don't make movies like Bog anymore." Now, he says that that's a good thing. I agree that they just don't make movies like Bog anymore. Bog was made in Wisconsin on an extremely low budget. There was no Hollywood premiere. There was no pomp or circumstance to its release at all. In fact, according to Wikipedia, the release date of May 1979 just says it was released in Albany, Georgia around that month and year. It might have played in other places. It may have played later in the year, some, in other locations. It may have premiered before that in Wisconsin or something. But what this is something I mentioned from time to time on this show. It's a movie that was made on the cheap so it could fulfill the drive-in markets around the country. Sometimes these movies are called regional films, but usually those types of movies are made in a locale and stay there, traveling around the small towns in the same state or portion of the country. For example, you can make a movie like this in Wisconsin and then it just plays in a bunch of Wisconsin drive-ins, or small local theaters, when there wasn't anything bigger to play or part of a twin bill or something. And I'm sure it could have played like in Illinois and Iowa and Minnesota, other local states in the region. A lot of these movies ended up, not only getting the tour of that, but they ended up selling the movies to cable and at times even sold them to some of the earliest video companies too. But anyway, this one expanded out though, but there is something kind of quaint and sort of nostalgic seeing these types of movies that weren't made by any kind of studio or any kind of real production company with a lot of experience. Sometimes movies like these are about as cynical as you can get, to spend as little money to make a decent amount of money by selling the movie to TV, to drive-ins, to small theaters, or whatever. There's a hometown feel to these movies, and someone could raise the money and get a few named actors like Gloria DeHaven and Aldo Ray to be in this movie and crank out something in a couple of weeks to get it in the drive-ins all over the place, basically to play in the background while teens play grab ass with their dates. It's the type of movie or sensation of getting the locals together to make a quickie monster movie that, kind of doesn't really exist in the same way anymore. Nowadays, these types of movies are still sort of getting made, on small budgets and getting released on streaming services after striking a deal. And in some ways, it's a familiar feel, but in many ways, these older movies have a better chance to be seen as something more nostalgic or vintage, especially in the ways the indie horror films made today, basically to be shuttled off to Tubi or whatever, just don't have. Again, it has that, we're putting on a movie, we're putting on a show here in this rural county in Wisconsin. There's a nicer feel to it at times. I like watching these types of stinkers for that very reason. It reminds me of something that could have played at the local drive-in when I was a little kid, or shown ad nauseum on TV on the Saturday monster movie of the week or whatever. But second, yeah, I got to borrow from the immensely popular internet show Best of the Worst on Red Letter Media's YouTube channel for this one. Bog was featured on Best of the Worst, and one of the big jokes throughout the episode was how one specific line is delivered. A special guest for that episode, Jack Quaid, consistently reenacted it, and it's pretty funny. But what makes this particular line so funny is how silly it is in a movie that is otherwise, up to this point and afterwards, kind of takes itself somewhat seriously, or at least far more serious than this specific moment. And what this specific moment is Jenny Glenn, the local coroner and I guess part-time biologist, is basically explaining to Sheriff Rydholm how bizarre these two women's deaths were and what could cause them to die from losing all their blood, and not from any kind of massive wound or anything like that that would indicate, oh yeah, they bled out this way. I mean, it's a sort of decent mystery as far as building the lore of this creature. We know there's a bog monster. I mean, we're signed up to see a movie called Bog that has a monster in it, so we know how to do the math on this, right? But as she's talking to Aldo Ray's Rydholm, she prefaces her line by saying that he'll think that she's being silly or acting crazy or something. But when prodded a little further to just say what's on her mind, she says, but could we have a Dracula running loose out there? It's delivered partly in a comedic way and partly in a very serious way. However, while that's a funny line in the movie that isn't trying to be a comedy, by the way, it's Aldo Ray's cartoonish double take coupled with a dramatic music sting that really makes this moment funny. Asking if they have a Dracula running loose out there when, I mean, what a line. But the Ray's double take is a comedy double take, but not one that you can take seriously. And it caught me off guard so much. Even though I know this line is in this movie, I had to pause the movie and spend some time laughing about it. It's so much funnier than even how Best of the Worst presented it, because I can now at least have the context around the moment, what comes before and how the movie treats itself before and after. It's just, it's great. It's one of those things that I don't know if it was something that came up on the day of the scene was being shot, or if it was in the script, and it's like, yeah, okay, well, we'll present this as a possible vampire bog monster, which is kind of interesting because the monster is kind of a vampire. Anyway, I'll talk about that right now. Lastly, I kind of like how dopey the monster is here. Okay, sure, it's a guy in a very obvious monster costume. But it's also a pretty good throwback to the monster movies of the 50s. It's got big old goofy fish eyes. It has claws for hands, or more accurately, it's claws for arms in general. It slobbers green slime and goo all over the place. It's a mess, but it also kind of looks like it's made out of seaweed, which would kind of make sense for defensive needs if it looked like that, so it could fit in with the muck and the plants of the bottom of the lake, right? But we don't really get a good look at the monster until the last 30 minutes of the movie, and I definitely wish there was more of it just to drive home the campy element of this film. But yeah, it's cool in that vintage 50s monster look. And I also like that this monster is completely and totally alien to what we think life would be like. Right? It's said it's part cancer, it's part animal, it's part mineral. It's all the things, but also kind of none of those things, because it's just basically a humanoid fish man. But it is also partially a stand-in for a Dracula. To go back to Jenny's line about, do we have a Dracula running around here? Because it's a bog monster because they have the shooting location of a bog. So they can have a fish monster, right? But it also, it reproduces, it sucks the blood out of its victims. It reproduces with a female by injecting part of itself into the female, making her then want to be a willing participant in breeding. It seems like a Dracula sort of thing, so yeah, it's crazy. But the movie doesn't even stop there. It also it also wants to sort out how it affects the blood. So they have this kind of scientific reason that, okay, well, we have eggs, so we want to have the stinger of the ending. We have a fish monster, but there's no second fish monster. Adriana's weird, and she's going to be the willing mate. So how can she mate with the monster when it kills everything else it touches, basically? It's really weird how much it wants to kind of get on that level. And at times it did feel like they were, kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and tried to see what stuck so that they can go with it in the process of the script itself. And I'm sure audiences latch on to different things about what they explain the monster as being. That said, I don't know anybody who paid that much attention to Bog like I just had to. But anyway, my point is that this is an interesting idea for a monster that they feel like they had too many ideas, and then ultimately all they needed to say was it was a fish monster that wants to eat people. And we would have been happy with that. But overall, Bog isn't a very good movie. But it is, like I said, a type of movie they don't make anymore. A regionally made monster movie with a silly creature, with a whole lot of weird attributes to its existence, and two very old white heroes who physically beat and set aflame the creature in the end. Hey, it's the late 70s, man. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next time, we hop back over the Atlantic for the British answer to Godzilla, 1961's Gorgo. So until next week, stay spooky.